Hello. Hello, my friends. Hello, DLD. Hello, DLD community. I'm so happy to be reconnected with you. It's been a long time. We didn't see us. We didn't hug us. We didn't um, touch us, smell us. It's too long. But this thing's a little substitute, especially the think of today. Some of you don't know me. I'm Steffi Czerny. I founded this DLD conference 15 years ago with a partner. And since then, I'm trying to bring the brightest minds together, the minds who are shaping our digital world, and ask the question, how is digitalization shaping our world? On my journey, 15 years of DLD, I met outstanding, interesting people. I made great friendships. I got so many insights. I got so many great experiences, and I'm very grateful. And some of them are more important to me than others, of course. And to get these people together, I'm traveling the world, and I'm a regular traveler to New York. I was. Right now, I couldn't. And what do I do when I'm in New York? I'm calling my friend Susan McPherson because she is so open always. She says, you have to go there, you have to meet them, you have to do this. And she is my scout in New York. And she is doing it, I feel always, out of friendship, out of niceness, out of being very generous with her informations. And I consider her since 10 years. Yossi Vardi, our chairman of DLD, introduced us as a good friend, as a very good friend in New York. And I'm very, very happy that you are here today with your new book, with your book, and you have a topic which really connects us. The topic is the topic of your book. The title of your book is The Lost Art of Connecting. The Lost Art of Connecting, to the gather, ask, do method for building meaningful business relationships. So far, I never read a book about this. But when I read in your book, it was so mind-blowing. It was so clarifying all my thoughts I always had on connectivity. So let's jump into it. Of course, Susan's biography is very interesting. She is a businesswoman. She has a great team. She was at PR Newswire. She was at Fenton. She's a marketing pro, but she is a networking pro. And now she will explain what she did with this book and why she did it and what's the sense of the book is. Let us jump right into it. Susan, sure. Thank you for being with us.
Well, first and foremost, thank you. And I just want to say, you of all people have really, truly built connections across this entire globe. And the magic that has happened and transpired and the impact, Steffi, that has from the relationships you have connected is unsurmountable. So
I just followed your footsteps. I your best pupil.
And we actually met in 2007. So it's actually been, wow. I think, however many years, I can't do the arithmetic. But, when I was writing this book, people like you were very much top of mind because, you every year at all the DLD events would just the way you would work your magic and bring people together was just remarkable. So I learned from you.
2007, we both were in kindergarten, weren't we?
Yeah. Oh, well, yes. Well, first grade.
Okay, I was first grade. You were kindergarten. Okay, and by the way, dear DLD folks, Susan introduced us to one of our superstars at DLD. You introduced me to Tristan Harris, remember?
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Great.
Amazing.
Tristan Harris.
Brilliant.
Such an impact to the world.
Yeah.
Thank you again for this. But now to your book. Yes. What does the title, The Lost Art of Connecting, mean to you? What is connecting to you?
That's a great question. And it's a question when I do book talks, I often ask of the group because a meaningful relationship can be very, very special to us and unique to each one of us. For me, a meaningful relationship is someone it's a relationship that stands the test of time. The people that show up in the good times and the bad, the people that offer to help before you can even ask for help. And we all know people like that, and we all have people in our lives like that. And quite frankly, if it wasn't for people like that, the last 13 months, I don't know if I would have made it through, because I have been 100% alone, no parents, no kids, no significant other. And I have a wonderful dog, but she isn't much of a talker.
Not yet. Wait a year.
But the actual title, The Lost Art of Connecting, was my reaction 4 years ago when I actually started conceiving the book, long before we even knew the pandemic was on the horizon, because I felt we had lost that meaningful connection. In other words, we were victims to our clicks and our likes and our followers as a way to measure our success in connecting. And then a friend had said to me that when she dropped her 2 children off at the school bus stop and she'd hug them goodbye and send them up on the bus, they would take their respective seats. And as soon as she looked up, they were both looking down at their handheld devices. And every other child on that school bus was doing the same. Now, I don't have incredible memories of my school bus rides. In fact, I have some pretty awful memories, but I talked to my classmates. So with both of those kind of themes in mind, I put forward my book proposal to in the notion of how do we get back the heart of connecting, the way, Steffi, you have done it for so many years. And then when I started to write, it was February of 2020. And then we know what happened in March. The world closed down. And all we had were the clicks and the likes and the followers. But I will tell you that through the 7 to 8 months of writing this book, through this pandemic, I interviewed extraordinary individuals who have made the notion of building meaningful connections the heart of what they do, and actually use that as a means to grow their professional lives. People like Baratunde Thurston, Adam Grant, Whitney Johnson, Tiffany Dufu. These are all people who are the characters in my book. So it's not just, from my experience, but they gave me hope that during this past year, we were being more intentional and more meaningful when we were connecting, because it's all we had were the technology tools. So that gives you a little bit of background of the lost art of connecting.
Thank you so much, Susan. But there are so many young people who have no idea, who start just their job, and they are so well trained. They know everything about algorithms. They know everything about business plans. They are very good in presenting, but they have maybe they have very less human touch, and they are not able to get connections, to learn. They want to learn how to be a connected person, how to use connectivity, not only to have more success in business, I have to say, this was young generation want, but also in their communities. How are they doing it? They are trained to be so logical, and they are trained to be so linear. And now they are sitting in front of their books and in front of their screens, and they have no clue how to connect. So what is your method? That's the method of, is the gather, ask, do method, which is on your title. Can you explain it a little to us?
I would be happy to, but I also just specifically want to address the question about young people. We can't expect them to be like, yes, I want to connect with people, if we don't demonstrate what comes from the connection, what impact happens from connection, what companies get funded because of connection, what nonprofits' mission actually is realized because of connection, right? I mean, you can't expect anyone to do something if they don't understand what the upside is, right? So, we can dive into that a little bit later. But the gather, ask, do is the methodology that I describe in my book. And for any of you listening who have written a book or planning to write a business book, you can't do it without a methodology. A publisher will not grant you, unless you're a famous person, and clearly I'm not a quote unquote famous person. So I had to come up with a methodology. Now, I have been connecting people since I was knee-high to a hopper. I'm still knee-high to a hopper, but on Zoom, I could be 6 feet tall, or at least in my wildest dreams. But it was in my blood. My parents, my father was a professor who taught at a women's college for 40 years, who literally embedded in me this notion of always being curious of others, always, no matter who they are, no matter where they came from, no matter what preconceived notions I had. And my mother did public relations for public television. And in that role, she was always building connections with reporters, with writers, with people within the television community. And so, that was very much absorbed in me. And I joke that at the breakfast table, every morning, I would literally have to vie for space for my bowl of cereal, because they would have the 5 local newspapers. This was in upstate New York. And yesterday's New York Times, because the New York Times would take, a day or two to get to outside of Albany. And they would be clipping and cutting and then going to their respective manual typewriters and typing little short notes saying, thinking of you, Cousin Harry, thinking of you, former student Joan, thinking of you, reporter Jim, and then literally keeping the U.S. Postal Service in business. So I assumed everybody's parents did this, okay? So that just gives you a little bit of background on kind of the world that I grew up in. And when I was thinking about the methodology of how I had become a serial connector, the gather, ask, do method is exactly what I would do. So the first part in gather is very much about a self-reflection. And I would go so far and be bold enough to state that this purgatory we're in right now, where we have one toe out the door, but the rest of us is inside, this is a perfect time to be doing this. So 1, ask yourself, what is a meaningful connection to you? Okay. And then once you determine that, think about the community or communities you want to build around you that are going to help you meet your goals in the next 4 years, 4 months, or hell, even 4 weeks. Once you do that, think very intentionally of how are you going to ensure that that community or communities doesn't look like you, doesn't sound like you, isn't the same age as you, isn't from your hometown. Like, be very intentional about how you're going to make that community inclusive. And lastly, as part of Gather, what is your secret sauce or secret sauces or superpowers that you can bring to the community? Because one of the underlying themes of the entire book is tipping networking on its feet and 180 degrees turning it from what can I get to how can I be of help? And until you determine what your superpower is or what secret sauces you have in your pockets, it's very difficult to be mindful of helping others, right? So that's...
I get it.
Yeah.
But can you give us a short idea of what could be, how would you describe meaningful?
Meaningful. Well, for me, it's the people who show up in the good times and bad. Meaningful means, we could go 3 years and maybe have not had a conversation, but when we speak to one another, it's like time didn't pass. Meaningful are people when I'm hurting or sad about something, I can pick up the phone even if I haven't talked to them in a while. That's for me. Steffi, what is meaningful to you?
Meaningful means that I know what I want, and meaningful brings me closer to this knowing what I want.
Okay. Well, see, for everyone, it's different.
What you described just is for me friendship.
Yeah.
Of course, friendship is meaningful too.
Yeah.
But in the case of this younger generation who are lost, who know nobody in their companies, nobody in their community, which they just moved in, they have to define what they want out of these new businesses. And so I always give them the advice: know what you want, what you really want. Where is your job bringing to? What do you want from your job? And then pick the most important people you imagine and get to know them.
Yeah.
And then comes your advice in: be nice, be friendly, be open, be generous. I think this is one of the key things you have. People forgot to be generous. Right. And I want to ask you, this what you described, be friendly, be generous, be open. Isn't this character how to say it, is this typical for character qualities, or can you learn this? Can you learn to be generous?
I think anybody can learn to be generous. I think, again, we have to show what the benefits are, what comes from generosity, right? Human behavior, to make behavior change, you have to show people very explicitly what is the output? What are you going to get from doing this? And I have learned that leading with how I can be helpful actually helps me.
Yeah, I think so too. I totally confirm what you say.
Yes.
I think it's so important. But Susan, we have not that much time, and I really want to let the audience know your book. So let's just get through the headlines.
Yeah. So
part one is the gather. Help! I don't know anyone. What is this?
Help, I don't know anyone means, especially for young people, they're starting out. They think they don't know anybody, but actually they do. Many of them just graduated college, so they have a collegial community. They have relatives. They have neighbors. If they belong to a faith-based institution, they could tap into that. So to me, I say start small. Start within your communities. And what I believe is this: it's not a numbers game. This is about going deeper with a smaller number of people, rather than, walking into a crowd and coming home with 20 business cards and not having any idea what the people do, right? We've all done that.
Next, invite to get invited. Let's get through, because this is how the audience will get most of it.
I love it.
Invite to get invited. What is this?
I have found over the years that if you were left out, if you were not invited, the easiest way to not feel FOMO is to create JOMO. And what I call JOMO is not what you think, joy of missing out, but rather the joy of meeting others. So what you do is you create your own gathering. You create your own DLD and you invite 3 members of DLD.
It's totally true. Yeah.
And you don't have to
create your own gatherings. It's so important.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be 50 people. You could invite 2 people and ask them to bring 2 people. And voila, if I do my arithmetic right, you're up to 8.
And Susan, it's not about money. You can invite people just for a butterbrot, for bread and butter, and a good wine. The wine shouldn't be bad.
Yes. Bread and butter sounds good to me.
It's on the mixture of the guests you invite. And then it's getting better and better. You will see, folks. So next, location. I love it. What do you mean with location?
Location doesn't matter anymore. What we've seen, from this awful pandemic. I mean, you're in Germany and we are having this conversation. So I would not let location be a determining factor.
Cool.
But the also beautiful thing is, because of technology, we have the power now to reach out to people irregardless of where they are on the planet. So don't let location be an intimidating factor.
You just said we have the power to reach out everywhere. Many people don't dare. They are too shy. What would you recommend to them?
Well, again, this is why it's really important to do that self-reflection and think about your secret sauces, because every single one of us has something to offer. And I suggest 2 things. When you're reaching out to somebody you don't know and you quote unquote have an ask, offer first, offer something, but also do a little research about the person you're reaching out to. When I was coming of age professionally, I had 2 tools, what we call the yellow pages, which probably a lot of people don't even know what that is, and the Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay. Today, before you reach out to anyone, you can find out what they've said that day on Twitter. You can find out about what they're doing professionally on LinkedIn. You can even find out if they have grandchildren by looking at their Instagram handle. So there is no excuse for not doing a little bit of research, so that when you reach out to somebody, you immediately establish a connection. But don't go so far as just asking the person to pick their brain or for their help. Think of something that you can offer up to them that can be helpful.
Yeah, I agree so much with you. And now the last topic of the gathering part is the constellation effect. What is the constellation effect?
Well, when we think of the constellations in the sky, they're constantly moving and they overlap. When you make introductions of people, it is not a one and done. It is not transactional. What will happen is stories will go on. tapestries of impact will be created by those people that you introduce. So to me, it's again back to proving why this is so exciting and worthy of our time, because it's a constant moving evolution. And I like to think that we're creating constellations, we're creating impact when we make connections.
Very good. So, next to the next chapter, to the next big chapter in the mythology is the headline is ask.
Yes.
So, and the beginning is, how can I help?
Yeah.
You mentioned it already, but how can I help is one of the tools you really recommend every young people, everyone.
Yes, everyone.
As the beginning, in the beginning. What is how can I help?
Well, it's a way to show up and to be human. And like you were saying early, to be kind and generous. And I honestly, and maybe I wear rose-colored glasses, but I honestly believe if we did a little more of that, this world would be a better place. And I know that sounds incredibly sappy, but it's true. And if we were more literally didn't carry our preconceived notions, in other words, every single person, no matter what role they play in society or what position they have, has a story, has something to share that you may not know about them or yourself. So when you lead with this notion of how can I be helpful, the world opens up to so much that if you don't, you miss out. But the ask is really truly about learning to ask meaningful questions that, Steffi, you are so good at. That isn't what did you have for lunch today, or what's the weather in your city, which guess what leads to dead end answers. But more, if you could go anywhere in this world at the end of this pandemic, where would it be and why? A question like that is going to elicit so much more information about that person that guess what gives you data that then you can be helpful. Yeah. Because maybe that's someone who's been to that city or that location.
Susan, we are talking about a very ideal situation. What are you doing if you are generous and if you are asking and and the person that you want to address and you want to get to know is dumping you, is arrogant, is not nice.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you it's happened to me many times in my life. Yeah. And I will also go so yes. Yeah. And being so tiny that I am, oftentimes people don't see me, and I have to shout just a little bit. Yeah. Yes. Well, we stick together, us tiny people. But, I'll be honest with you. And maybe it took me to get past the age of 50. Move on. If somebody isn't going to grant you that graciousness, there's, I don't know the actual number, but there's 9 billion people on this planet. Move on.
Yeah. Yeah, don't be embarrassed. Don't be furious. Don't be. Just take it, and it's his or her fault not to talk.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think so too. But it's you have to learn it because people are nice in general, but there are some. I don't want to say Yossi's word, assholes, but there are.
Bingo! I'm so glad you said that.
And you have to be aware of them. That sometimes it happens, and don't be afraid of this moment.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's go to next. Pitch perfect. I think it's important. What is pitch?
This is a little bit what I addressed earlier. Prepare. Do your research, okay? I go so far as when you are making an introduction between two people, or if you are going in to meet with, let's say, a supervisor, or you're looking for funding for your company, do the research about the person you're going to meet in such detail that you could give the person's Oscar speech. In other words, the Oscars were just a week ago. For those of us who watched, when they would introduce someone who was about to win, they would give like a story of their lives, right? I mean, I'm not saying you have to go all the way back to their childhood, but know enough about that person so that you can make a proper introduction or make an ask or offer to help. It's good. It's a good thing to do. And you're in a much better situation.
I understand this, but I meant, maybe it's my being too German, I meant with pitch perfect that you have to know if you address someone and you are able to pitch to him, you not only should know what he or she has done, what her goals are, what her companies, but you have to know what you want to pitch your idea to them.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
you have to get along with your ideas to match your ideas with their ideas. And this is the perfect pitch, I think.
Yeah, well, it's also, again, back to that. What are your goals? What are you hoping to accomplish? And how can you, really enunciate and articulate those? And you can only do that if you prepare. But I think it's also reading the room and knowing who you're talking to and adjusting that pitch so that the person who's receiving it has an interest in the first place. And much of how you deliver that is going to depend.
It's so important. It's so important. And I see that I see many young, or all even younger, even they are not interested in the person they are pitched to. They are only interested in their pitch and in their subject. And this is not good. It's not. It's not bonding. So the next, speak up. A guide for introverts.
Yes.
When I started working for Hubert Burda, I was so shy. I had to take pills to get over my shyness because I hardly couldn't enter the room with more than 2 people. And I had heart bumping and it was so terrible. And it took me some years to get over it. So what is your advice? Speak up. For introverts.
Well, and I was fortunate enough to interview several U.S. known introverts who gave me tremendous advice because honestly, I got a D in conduct in 5th grade. So I've never been an introvert, but I will tell you, I fantasize about being an introvert. Just for a few days, it would be kind of fun to see what it was like. But where I delineate very sharply between networking and meaningfully connecting. So for an introvert, to me, this might be a little less scary because it isn't about meeting 25 people. It's meeting a smaller and having deeper conversations. It's also coming to the table with questions to ask and then just listening and using the power of listening. But a couple of tips for people who are walking into a room, whether it's a virtual room or a real room when we're back in some sense of normalcy, is think of the power of 3s. Go with the goal to meet 3 people, share 3 things, and learn 3 things. So for an introvert, that to me seems like it's palatable. So I'd have to ask the Steffi before the pills if that would be palatable.
Yes, it's a good idea. I should memorize it and recommend it to my young colleagues. Well, sometimes
it's doable, it's feasible, and then if you do it, you then can follow up with those 3 people and build those relationships.
But again and again, I think it's so important, and I'm so happy that you are teaching us this. You have people who want to learn connectivity, who want to be successful. They have to learn about what they really want. What is their goal?
Well,
and they have to feel themselves, and then they can be open to other people.
Well, and this is why before you go to an event, again, online, think about that. Think, what do you want to accomplish? And use these tools that are laid out in my book or whatever book. But in other words, go with the goal that I'm going to learn 3 new things, right? Like, think about that very intentionally, and you will.
3 new things. Your next book is 3 new things.
I love that.
Susan, connection is my superpower. You wrote in the introduction of your book. It's the beginning. Your superpower. What is a superpower?
It is something you can do in your sleep. I think it is something, I mean, again, I go back, in the book, I also call it your chief differentiating factors. And if you, anybody listening, has trouble thinking about what your superpowers are, ask the people who love you, ask the people you work with, ask your family members, ask your dog. Literally, people can tell you. And I'll just quickly say, in 2007, right about when I met you, Steffi, I went away with 7 girlfriends. And our goals that weekend was to declare what our superpowers were. And it was during that weekend that I actually got the gumption to say, I am a serial connector. And of course, after I said it, I wanted to pee in my pants because it sounded so ridiculous. But now, 16 years later, I wrote a book about it. And I have lived that. And anyone who knew me, they were telling me that, but for some reason I was afraid to own it. And so to me is every one of us has superpowers. So I encourage you to figure them out and then use them, name them, carry them, espouse them, write about them. But don't be afraid. I was for way too long.
Yeah, I can imagine. And now you're so super. No,
I'm just old.
I have a very curious question, and maybe you don't want to answer it, but how do you make money with super connecting?
Yeah, a really great question. And I guess the number one way is be a matchmaker, right? If we go back to the old country, they called them yentas.
Yes, our relatives have been, I'm sure, yentas.
Yes. Somewhere in Ukraine, way back when, in the shtetl, while some were milking cows.
We still are matchmakers, aren't we?
Absolutely. But, I run a social impact communications firm, and often we are involved in client engagements and building coalitions. So it really comes in handy to actually, be able to take people that may not be alike and find the match, find the things that are commonalities and bring them together. Also, my business is now almost 8 years old. I mean, we're a small company. I'm hiring my 13th employee this week, but 95% of the business over this 8 years, and mind you, I founded the company at age 48, but 95% of the business has been inbound. So what that taught me was the connections that I made in my 20s, my 30s, even part of my 40s have now come back. And it's not like back then that I was like, yeah, I'm helping you so that in 30 years you can come back and help me. It never was even a glimmer in my mind that I was going to be running a company. It wasn't even part of the equation. So I guess the lesson, again, for the young people who are thinking, well, what's the point? You're creating a constellation of connections that you will then be able to tap into in your 40s, in your 50s, in your 60s.
Interesting. Susan, what my competitive advantage in the connecting business is, when I was young, I was really terrible child. I was kicked out of so many schools, and therefore I have so many school friends from school.
Because you went to so many schools.
Some of them are now very successful, and I know them. I know them sometimes only for 3 months, but I know them. We went to school together. So this is one of the good sources of my network.
I love
that. Bad school behavior.
But what you're proving is it can come from anywhere. We tend to think that it's only, through our jobs or through, our where we play sports or whatever, but it is everywhere and anywhere. You just need to look around. And I love that you I'm sorry you got kicked out of school, so.
I was really bad. And we are still at the ask part. What is Communication 101?
Wow.
Sounds like a great title.
It's really about, and again, I go into so much detail, so I don't want to bore listeners.
No,
but
it's fascinating.
It's really being about mindful communications. Like, how do you communicate? How do you follow up with people? And being very intentional about it. And also Communication 101, addressing people in maybe the way they want to be addressed. Some people prefer phone, some people prefer text, some people prefer WhatsApp, some people prefer email, some people want snail mail. Okay. And for those of you that's in the mail. Yes. And to me, it's a gracious thing to ask. Just ask somebody, how do you want to receive?
Mm-hmm. True. I'm an email person. I'm not so much in social media, and I like emails. I think emails are very good for me.
See, and I'm going to make a mental note of that.
Yeah, good. Within the methodology, we had gather, we had ask, and now what is coming now? Is coming the important part of doing.
Yes.
Do. So the art of follow-up. So important. How do you imagine?
Well, I must say that to get from the ask, after you've asked meaningful questions, and get to the do, which is my favorite place to be, you have to listen, and you have to listen well. And in the research for the book, I learned how woefully bad we are at listening. And this year was probably a true horror show because we had so many distractions, right? But if you listened carefully, you have all the data and all the tools to go to the next phase, do, where you become trustworthy, helpful, responsible, all the things that actually make you successful professionally and probably in some ways personally, if people can rely on you. And that's when you follow up after you've met somebody, whether it's the next day, the next week, or the next month. But when you follow up, you actually cite something that you talked about. And the reason I suggest that is that's the start of a relationship, right? It's a reciprocity. It also confirms in the other person's mind that you saw and heard the person, right? There's no greater gift we can give one another than I don't want to say prove, but showing that we saw and heard them, right? People want to be felt like they were listened to. And if you, when you were talking or engaging with that person, had asked them meaningful questions, you'll have an insight into ways you can be helpful, whether it's to connect them to somebody else, recommend a restaurant at a city they're planning to go visit, or suggest a conference that they need to put on their radar. They need to go to DLD, but these are the things that actually are the do. And I know sometimes people say to me, Susan, don't you get exhausted helping people all the time? But what has happened, and Steffi, you, I'm sure, will understand this, when you have a broad pool of connections to tap into, you become more efficient.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You're not doing it all. You are able, when somebody says to me, Susan, I'm starting a coral restoration project. I don't know anything about coral restoration, but I know people who do.
Mm-hmm. That's very important. Susan, I have a question in my mind, which I have to think for my business very carefully. We are people of connections. How do we keep the connections going? I want to address the fact of implosion. Sometimes you are within your connection bubble, your connectivity, always the same people, and they are great and they help each other, and so you have to be open to new parts of the connectivity. How are you doing this? How can you be? It's very easy to rely on a bubble of connection points.
Yes, and we all do.
It's difficult to get new patterns in your circle.
Yeah. Well, I'm a big believer in asking people for introductions to other people, but not with the intention just to fill me or to do things for me, but introductions so that I can then be helpful to those people. Mm-hmm. Okay. And there's actually nothing wrong with doing that. And I think we all need to be more intentional about introductions to people who aren't just like us. Mm-hmm. Because if not, we're just being fed. We're not learning anything new. We're just being fed what we already know and what we already believe. Yeah. So the obvious to me is to go through the people you know and ask them. I also, just from moving so many times in my adult life, professionally, I found when I moved to different cities, if I joined nonprofit organizations and volunteered some of my time, not a huge amount of my time, because of course I was working, that would be a great way to build and cross boundaries, meet people who weren't just like me, and also learn new skills that I could then bring back to the workplace.
Interesting. I know, my topic is right now we are on a very interesting point. Digitalization is like electricity. Everyone can talk about digitalization. Everyone is connected, everything. But on the rise, there will be frontier technologies, quantum, biosynthetic, all these kind of things. We have no idea
what's coming.
What's coming. We see that there is something to come. And I have to be very frank, I have not yet connections to the heroes in quantum, to the machine learning, to the augmented. So I have to be very open to get these new contacts into the DLD network. And I'm very, it's sometimes I'm even bored about again a new thing. And
I know, it's like, aren't we done yet?
We're done yet, another new thing. So it's so boring. And it's not that easy, Susan, to keep up with constant change. What is your recipe to keep up? It's curiosity, of course. It's your inborn curiosity, but you have to have a certain mindset.
Yeah, you do. And you have your go-to people, okay? You know, you have you have wonderful colleagues that also can be, right? Right?
Team.
Yes. Yes.
Hubert.
Yes. So it isn't I think sometimes we have to take the onus off ourselves to be all consuming. I mean, I joke now that I can't believe my employees let me come to work anymore because they're so good and they've got it down, but I guess that's what we want to get to. But I think, obviously when things become overwhelming, we need to restock, take time off. Obviously I'm a big believer in that. But I do know, Steffi, having known you now, 14 or so years, that you will find a way. You're relentless. You're curious. Yes.
But we have to teach our audience, our participants, our friends, our clients to keep up. Yeah. I think it's very, very important that they also become kind of pattern recognizers.
Yep. And again, this is very much like the constellation themes, because as we build connections and things overlap, other people can be feeders of information. So one of the unique kind of facets that I learned in the book, that people we've never even met affect our lives. Yeah. Because the people we know them, but we've not met those people, but we're influenced by them. Right. But we're still influenced. So, to me, it's like, it's just this ripple effect, and it's fascinating. Like it's mind-boggling when you think about it, that over your lifetime, you've been affected by people that you've never even met, but it's true.
Yeah, it's true. So, yeah, I think it's very important that you read a lot, that you hear a lot, that you consume. As you said, when you've been a child with the 5 dailies, I have my books.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so important that you keep curious and keep awake.
My 93 or 92-year-old aunt, she'd kill me if I said 93. Her husband, my uncle, who died many years ago, worked for the State Department. So they lived all over the world. And, she used to have to host a lot of events and go to a lot of events. They lived in the Congo, Ethiopia, Austria, Paris. But she would always, before any event, would listen to the Voice of America. Because that was, well, first of all, in the Congo, that was probably the only radio she could probably understand. But what that would do was give her enough of today's current events so she could be conversive and carry on conversations. And I just, I take that to heart, because now, even today, before I'm hosting or going somewhere, I tend to listen to National Public Radio just so I can be, and they have obviously news, but they also have, like the other day, they had this wonderful story about 140 goldfish that were found in a pond and put up for adoption. And every single one of the goldfish were adopted within 24 hours. So anyhow, I don't mean to take us on a goldfish trip, but it leads you to be an interest, find ways to keep feeding ourselves so that we stay on the cusp of what's happening.
That's a so important thing. I think we all have to learn about how to do a proper conversation, which not means immediately come to the point you want to address, but to behave educated, to behave diplomatic, to behave even elegant. If elegance has nothing to do with dressing up, it has it's a certain style in your heart. And
I love that.
I think
and lead with curiosity, right? Yeah. Don't come with assumptions. I in the book I shared a story that actually really solidified it in my mind to never have preconceived notions. And if I could, I'll just share it real quickly. In 2017, I received an email from a friend who said, "Susan, a filmmaker friend of mine wants to get into a refugee camp in Greece tomorrow. Can you help?" For the listeners, one of the boards I serve on is the United States arm of the UN High Commission for Refugees. So it wasn't so bizarre to have a question like that, but I was super busy. And my first assumption was the last thing the world needs is another documentary film about refugees that no one will see. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, really? Am I going to do this? I had 7 minutes. I made a call. I made a couple of calls. I got the gentleman in the camp the next day in Lesbos. I learned a week later, Steffi, that he was not a documentary filmmaker. He was a big budget Hollywood producer who had done a number of Tom Cruise films. During that visit, he became so enamored with the plight of refugees that, wait till you hear what happens. A month later, a friend of mine who's an advisor for the global NGO CARE reached out and said, Susan, do you happen to know any filmmakers who'd be willing to go to the Syrian border and teach Syrian youth how to make films telling the story of their exodus from their homelands? Not only did I have the person, when I reached out to Brandt, this fellow, Brandt Anderson, he said yes within 60 seconds. And he gathered 8 other Hollywood filmmakers, and they went and spent 2 weeks at a camp on the Syrian border, teaching youth how to tell their stories. Epic Foundation, which is a fairly large foundation, because of this, created a film academy at the Azraq refugee camp in Jordan, where this learning happened. And then Brandt went on to create a narrative film that is called Refugee, that Angelina Jolie got wind of and saw, and is now taking all over the planet to global leaders and heads of state to help them understand that this refugee crisis is still very much happening. And, you live in Germany, you know. But now, if I'm not going to say that I was responsible for all of that, but had I listened to my assumptions, had I, said, really, documentary film, what's the point? Some of that could have been missed. And so I think the teachable moment there is, we need to be open. We need to look at people beyond what we consider are their titles. So.
Yeah, you're so right. So we are still in the do part. What is spread the wealth?
Well, that actually came about, money, talking about money is like the myth. It's like a no-no, right? And especially like women.
About sex.
Yeah. Although I think people talk about sex more than they talk about money. Okay. At least women. Okay. And again, Americans are very different than Germans. Americans tend to be very no sex, they just don't, and no money. But I found that when you could have meaningful conversations about money, you actually opened up and created more constellations of connections. I also, about 7 years ago, realized, and this is I don't want to say, it's going to sound really sad, and it is sad, but the good that came out of it. My mom was killed in a tragedy when I was almost 22. And my family, she was killed in a hotel fire, which also killed 97 other people. There was a class action lawsuit that gave my family a bit of money, not enough to just retire or anything like that. But that money I invested, and years later, I have used to invest in women-led startups. And that also became an enormous means to connect with people. But instead of just writing checks, and I've done 18 investments in women-led startups. And I do women-led because we know the exorbitant amounts of funds go to male-started businesses. Or male, yes. Yeah. And so what this has done is it's built my connections with so many people that I never would have had the chance to meet. Now, granted, I'm coming from a place of privilege, but I also have always decided if I'm going to invest, it's not just about the money, and I want to be able to offer other benefits, other superpowers. And we know in this conversation, connection is one of them. So if I can help these founders meet more people or be introduced to people that can further their mission, then I am furthering my constellations of connections. So I'm not suggesting that everybody, we know everybody can't be an angel investor, but if you have the means, it's a wonderful way to build equity, to help people who typically aren't able to get funding, women of color, et cetera. So that's a bit about build the wealth.
That's wonderful. I think it's so important. I hope that you, all my colleagues and my friends and my listeners and my audience and my participants, my DLD friends, listened to what Susan just said. It's so important to be open and to spread the wealth, to give, and you will see it's already in the Bible. If you give, you will get. And you get, and we get, through your book, we got a lot. We got a lot.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for my still bad English, but
it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
No. I just get from my team, Steffi, sag uns Bescheid, when they want to get into the questions. Yes, let's do some questions. It's okay.
I love that. I'm doing okay. Am I like answering right?
We could talk forever, Susan. The two of us.
I know. I want to do a workshop at one of the next DLDs. I would love
to. Let's do a workshop. I have it in mind. I follow up on this.
I know you will.
Via email.
Yes, and I will respond via email.
Okay. GL, it's your part now.
Hi, Susan. Hi, Steffi. Thank you so much for your great talk. Actually, a lot of questions were already answered because you give us a lot of content. Susan, it looks like you have been prepared with your company for this time of age right now, since you started your company almost 8 years ago, totally remotely, right? Like you're the pro in working remotely. So that's the new status quo. And that could be also a good theme for our topic for our workshop, Steffi. So how would you ensure or make sure that the connectivity between people who work remote and those who are in office in a, let's say, hybrid work environment? How would you ensure that? What's your tip?
Well, the biggest tip is the powers of that company, who owns the keys to the company, needs to create a safe atmosphere so people feel they can be who they are. Mm-hmm. You know, we hear jargony, certainly here in the United States, like bring your full self to work. And people can only do that remotely or in person if they feel safe to do that. And you're only going to feel safe if the folks who are running the company, the C-suite, actually do the same. You know, this past year, I've been solely alone for 13 months, and I'm getting a little sick of me, myself and I. But there were times when I would come to our meetings and I'd have tears in my eyes because I was, you know, and I'm not saying like, woe is me. I mean, I certainly, you know, I had a livelihood. I didn't get sick. I didn't lose loved ones, at which millions and millions of people did. But I'm just saying, you know, it was hard at times. So I could have said, no, I'm going to be Superwoman. I'm not going to let them see who I really am. But I came as who I was. And what that did was everyone else felt safe to be who they were. And it was okay if people had down days because it's been bloody hard this past year. So my answer is lead, you know, if you're leading an organization, create the space by being yourself vulnerable.
And I remember you were talking to one of your interviewers about that fun theme-related topic night you have with your colleagues, where someone brings their own passion or idea, so you can actually connect on a deeper level.
Yes. Well,
hobbies.
Yes.
How was that?
Well, every 2 weeks, you know, we have our quote unquote happy hour, but each time one employee has to come up with the theme. So one time we had a talent night. One time we had a flower arranging class. One time we had bring your favorite, what was your favorite food as a child? And then each person made, and then we came and had a collective dinner. So, you know, I have an employee from Uganda, and her dish was very different than an employee I have from Bulgaria. But it was a wonderful moment to really learn about people, you know, who they really are, right? Mm-hmm. Not just who like shows up every day.
Right. Speaking of deeper connections, as it is talked of a lot, audio creates a great or a different atmosphere. Actually, it's more intimate, and it's more people feel more connected through audio, as into, let's say, imagery related social media like Instagram or Snapchat. So especially for some things like podcasts is one thing, but Clubhouse, for example, is a big thing still. People are using it and find connections about that. What is your advice for those kind of tools for creating and connecting on a deeper level?
Sure. Well, Clubhouse is a fascinating phenomena, and we know it is growing, you know, in leaps and bounds. And, you know, in the book, I talk about how important it is to do better listening. If you are going to be successfully making connections on Clubhouse, you need to learn and practice good listening, because that's the only medium. So if you're not going to be listening, or you're going to be multitasking, you're going to miss everything. Also, within Clubhouse, there isn't the means to actually connect with another Clubhouse member. You have to go out of network and connect with people. So you have to take an extra step, which I realize for some people is a big jump. It's like jumping into a different sandbox. But if you have, if you're hearing somebody or listening to someone who sounds extraordinarily interesting, go the next step and connect with them on Twitter or Instagram, or look them up on LinkedIn, but go to that next step. But here's the advice: don't ask them for help. Offer something that you could be helpful to them. Because again, for those of us who receive the "can I pick your brain" emails and texts and WhatsApps, which, it's like chalk on or fingernails on a chalkboard, or whatever this.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I think you get what I'm saying, GL.
Okay. Totally. And it's your mantra, right? Ask what I can do for you. I think that's a very good mantra. Is that, so what does serendipity do to you, right? What does that mean to you?
I love serendipity. It makes me have to think on my feet, like I'm doing right now.
Okay, so it's coherent with your book.
Yes, and to me, serendipity has actually been, I often say, which I think is very similar to serendipity, it's the detour, not the destination. Meaning, every door you open up, you don't know what's on the other side, but if you don't open that door, you are missing potential amazing constellations of stories, of happenings, of new people, new ideas. So I think of that very similar to serendipity, and I never want to live a life where serendipity doesn't happen.
Right. You said in the 100 Women to Hear podcast that women need more than one network. How does that, is that unique to women? How does that work?
Well, obviously coming of age professionally in a world that is still very much run by, a patriarchy, in most cases, and we're missing so many opportunities if we're only having one viewpoint. But coming of age that way, it would behoove me to not connect and network with men, because, I needed to learn how they got to where they are, how they got to the C-suite, how they got to the boardroom, how they negotiate. So I think it's important for women to obviously interact and lack of it, connect with men. But I think we also, women, just look at this past year, women have borne the brunt of this horrific pandemic in much more dramatic numbers than men. So women need to have connectivity with other women, so we can commiserate, so we can, rely on each other in a very different way than I think with men. So I think it is helpful to have, differing circles. They will overlap, and they should overlap, but I do think that that's important.
Because you mentioned the refugee NGO, and I know you're very active in many NGOs, especially supporting women and young girls who code, for example. We had one question about what can young refugees do who come here to have like a new home, but no social background, and are in their bubble, of course. So how would you, it's a tough one, but how would you suggest to open up? Because here's the thing, I feel that the social media also creates these bubbles, and we are not diversified in our contacts we are having, especially in a time like this, where we actually just see what's right in front of us, right? You miss out on diversity on all scales. So, but back to the refugee question, how can people,
Well, I can't talk about, refugees living in Germany, but in the United States, there's refugee settlement organizations that are actively working to create connections between refugees, that are newly resettled, and communities. And actually, a dear friend founded an organization called Hello Neighbor. And Hello Neighbor is based in Pittsburgh, but has a network all across the country. And what Hello Neighbor does is it pairs families, like American families, with newly settled refugees, so that the refugees actually have a way to learn more about cultural nuances, about how to sign your child up for school, all the things that are very difficult when you come to any new country. And there isn't like a master playbook, right? So, I would look, if I was, again, in the shoes of a refugee, which, I can't say I've ever experienced. I mean, I've been to refugee camps. I've spent enormous amounts of time with refugees, but I have never experienced the horrors that these individuals have gone through. I will say that because of their experiences, they are extraordinarily resilient. So I would use that resiliency to reach out, to use technology where it makes sense, right. But also think about and even though, quote unquote, you are a refugee, you still have superpowers. You still have enormous skills, and you have things to offer. So, it definitely, you bring an extraordinary gift anywhere you go with carrying those good things that you have deep inside you. I hope that makes sense.
It makes sense. And also, I think we have to admit that the youth in general is way more open for communications.
Yes.
As Steffi mentioned, sometimes we are over-connecting, but maybe are not going deep enough. So that's why I really love the combination between what you say on the deeper level, trying to get to know who this person really is, instead of making sure to get this, to find the cherry on top and just milk them, basically.
Yes.
Is there a way, last question, is there a way, if there has been antipathy, to reverse that? Or would you just go and say, you know what, if you don't like my companionship, don't?
Yeah, I think, I one of the amazing leaders I interviewed in the book was Ruth Ann Harnish, who runs the Harnish Foundation. And she is a big believer in intentionality and being very upfront about what your goals are when you interact with others. And when you are intentional and you put out what you're hoping to, do, whether it's as simple as, I want to get to know you better. I want to learn more from you. I want to learn more from you so I can be helpful. But if the person on the receiving end is just, you move on. But if you're intentional, then at least you're putting the opportunity out there. And, I'm going to be honest, it hurts. It feels awful. But it's like putting a round peg in a square, whatever I don't know what the actual statement is, but you know what I'm saying. It just doesn't fit.
Yes, and it's also like the ego, just let go.
Let go.
Yeah, that's inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you, GL. Thank you, Steffi.
Susan, this was amazing. It was a really good fit. Thank you, GL. Thank you for helping putting the young questions into the topic. I'm very grateful. Thank you, Susan. Let me end this good show with a quote from another DLD friend, from Bess Comstock. She wrote about the book, whether you are an executive, an associate, or a job seeker, the lost art of connecting is the handbook you need to cultivate meaningful relationships. Susan McPherson infuses her guidance with humor, vulnerability, very important, by the way, and encouragement. Yes, you did. It's a joy to read and will forever change the way you think about networking. Isn't it good? It's a wonderful quote from Beth Comstock.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. And I'm sure we will see us soon again. Ciao.
Guten Tagen. Mwah. Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao.